Good morning. We're out foraging this morning and I want to talk to you today about mullein. Have you heard of this plant? It grows everywhere, especially in the country alongside fence lines. It likes dry, hot, arid weather and soil, and you usually find it coming up in June. Here is our common mullein, and I just want to run through the plant real quick before we get into the kitchen and start crafting with it. This is common mullein, and I also have some special other type of mullein to show you today too. We'll start with common mullein. You will see this most often. This plant starts small down to the ground as fuzzy little leaves at first. It's a low-lying plant, and as the weather warms and the season progresses, it shoots up and eventually forms like a flower pod on the top. This part will blossom, these beautiful yellow flowers, and then the fuzzy leaves are on the bottom. The whole plant is medicinal. We will be using the flowers that don't blossom all at once. They tend to come just like this, a few a day. So if you're out there foraging, come back daily and gather them, and always leave a few for the pollinators. What I'm doing is going around and plucking these little flowers off because we're going to make an earache oil with them. This is a very special oil that is so medicinal and helps earaches so much. And all you have to do is take the flowers and then put them into a carrier oil of choice. I often use a single source extra virgin olive oil. Add a little bit of garlic to that from your garden and let that infuse for at least 4 to 6 weeks. Then you can drop that into your ear when you have an earache, and it will remedy that and soothe it. It is wonderful. For us, I'll make this time of year and actually let it infuse into 6th season. That way it's been infused nice and long and is ready in case we get any kind of ear infection during that time. Now that I got my beautiful flowers, I'll put those to the side, and now we can talk about the leaf. The leaf is used for lung support and bronchial support. So if you have a cough, again, in the 6th season, or just an ongoing cough you can't get rid of, asthma, any kind of lung issues, you can take this tea and you can use it fresh, or you can dry it to have later, and you can make it into a tea to drink for that lung support. You can even take that dried leaf and use it to smoke it, believe it or not, for lung support. Now I'm going to gather a few of these leaves, other than we're mainly focused on blossoms today. And speaking of blossoms, the yellow butterfly mullein and the white butterfly mullein is a rare sister of this common mullein, and I actually have some to show you today, so let's go. This is my beloved butterfly mullein. This right here is the white version. This is so hard to find and such a fun find. And this behind me is the yellow, the butterfly yellow mullein. As you can see, not much leaf or foliage to forage, but it is all blossom. And I love how delicate this one is. It is so delicate, and the centers pink and orange. It is just so beautiful. So we're gonna gather up these blossoms, and now I'm gonna meet you back after this in our kitchen to go ahead and get these stored, preserved, and into oil. All right, welcome back to our apothecary area of our farmhouse. This time of year is devoted completely to foraging. If you follow us on Instagram or even here on YouTube, you've probably caught on that we are foraging almost every day. The reason why is that foraging window is small. Often we can only gather a plant from our land and surrounding areas where we enjoy going within just a few weeks to a month or so before that plant has arrived and is forageable and dies again. When we're out foraging this plant, we're only taking about 1/3 of the blossoms and leaving the rest for the wildlife, and so that it will reseed for next year, and we can be blessed with those harvests for next year and the years prior or subsequent to that. So when something is ready to go, such as the mullein blossom, that is what we focus on primarily. And every day we go out and gather the mullein as it's blossoming and bring it back home. What do we do with the mullein from there? We infuse it into an oil and make an earache oil. So we gather what we need to last ourselves and our business, ideally the entire year. So since this is our full-time job and what we do, we are able to forage and cultivate, grow, harvest year-round and in that season full-time. We feel so blessed to be able to do so. So as you've been following us, we have been harvesting mullein like you saw in the previous video clips. And now, why do we harvest the mullein? Not only, like I mentioned earlier, do we harvest those furry leaves to use in teas and to possibly smoke for bronchial issues and lung issues. That can be a remedy of choice to help with that. The flowers, however, are what we are currently after, and we use that, as I mentioned, in what we call an earache oil. We take those flowers and we preserve them and infuse the oil simultaneously into that carrier oil of choice. For an earache oil, we use a single source extra virgin olive oil. One of our favorite and most readily available olive oils is, believe it or not, from Costco, Kirkland's brand, and it is amazing. So if you're in the market for trying out an olive oil that's high quality, first of all, it needs to be extra virgin, and second, if you can find single source, which is hard to do, but if you can find it, use that. Now we forage about 1 hour to 3 hours a day probably, and again, we're not after the entire plant, we're not after taking all of the blossoms. We are taking a little bit at a time. So when we get back home, we often don't have enough at a time to make an entire oil. Sometimes we do. So what you can do as you're gathering that week, for example, is start a jar of oil and add to it as you go. So you can put in your blossoms and fill it and cover it with enough oil so they don't go bad. And then till the next day, then add a few more blossoms as you collect it, fill it with a little bit more oil, and continue that so you're preserving your blossoms and they're not going bad as you're waiting to accumulate enough to make something with it. As I teach with infused oils, we want to always dry our plant matter first to remove the moisture, i.e. water, before we infuse it into oil, because as I mentioned before, water and oil don't mix, and therefore the oil can't fully penetrate the plant, drawing those medicinal properties out and into the oil. So that is why we dry. However, there are always exceptions to the rule, and with dry herbs and very thin, dainty, wispy florals, you can get away with using fresh. For example, pine needles have to be fresh. Sweet gum pods have to be fresh. Also, mullein flowers can be dried, but if you notice, they'll shrivel up into little balls of almost nothing if you dehydrate them, or laying them out on a screen, they still shrink up. They're not as pretty. Because they're so paper thin, you can put them fresh into oil, because as you'll see, almost the second they hit the oil, they become almost translucent, and you can tell that that oil is really zapping through those petals with no problem. So again, you can, if you're collecting mullein blossoms throughout a week or a few weeks, you can dry them in that hanging tower I showed you, or carefully on screens or in a dehydrator if you put something down first so they don't fall through the rack. You can dry them and store them in a jar until you have enough and then add your oil. You can do it that way. Or like I said, you can use fresh in this infusion, and that is a normal way to prepare this infused earache oil. So that's up to you, dry or fresh. And like I said, you can even collect fresh and add to a growing jar of oil, as long as your oil is always covering and you're shaking that around and making sure those petals and that flower is getting fully covered and saturated and held under the oil. And within a day or two, you'll quickly see those flowers become heavy with oil and they will sink to the bottom, and you will not have to worry as much about them floating the top and being exposed and possibly molding or going rancid in your oil. Until that time comes, you just shake it up every day or every time you see it, and that weight will eventually pull those flowers to the bottom. So if it seems like we're going hard for the mullein right now, we are, because again, we have a limited amount of time and we're making we have an actual projection of how much we want to make for business and for our household. But again, we're seizing that opportunity because we only have right now to make it. We don't buy, dried mullein leaves from a supplier. It all comes from our farm and surrounding land that we cover and forage on and gather ourselves. This earache oil, combined with the antimicrobial, antibiotic capabilities of garlic, naturally reduces the pain and soothes and can remedy an ear infection. It is a staple in our house and has been for years as we've raised our 6 children. My husband has had issues with his ears growing up through his whole life, and it has been just a staple here at the Wild Carrot Farmstead. Now, ear infections are nothing to mess with. This doesn't necessarily get to the root cause of the problem of the earache, which I would suggest doing, and that this is not medical advice, but something we do at home to ease the symptoms of an ear infection until the root cause of the infection can be addressed. Properties in the mullein flower can soothe and alleviate nerve pain and inflammation, and combined with garlic and its antimicrobial and antiviral properties that mullein also holds, it's like a powerful punch for that earache. These 2 amazing herbs pack antioxidants, enzymes, and minerals to help combat infections and alleviate pain. Also, when you combine these 2 together, it can reduce congestion and swelling in the lymph system, allowing the ears to flow and clear up. The olive oil can loosen earwax, and the garlic neutralizes bacteria that could be in the ear canal. So by combining just 3 ingredients, often from your garden or off your land, you can create this awesome earache oil, and it's no wonder why this is chosen time and time again as a possible remedy for those pesky and annoying and oh so ouchy ear infections that can run through your family. Okay, so you have your things, you have your mullein blossoms, you have your garlic, you have your olive oil, you even have a sterilized glass jar to put it in. Now what? How do we make it? All right. So here is the recipe to this oil. You're going to use 50-50 ratios in a handful of garlic. That is the recipe that has been passed down to me. It is tried and true. I know it is not exact, but that is how we do it. So for example, for 1 cup of mullein flowers, you would use 1 cup of extra virgin olive oil and a little handful of garlic cloves. If I have to give you a number for 1 cup of mullein leaves to 1 cup of olive oil, I would say about 10 small cloves of garlic. After you combine those ingredients, select a jar where those ingredients will be filled to the top, and you can cap it off, preferably with a plastic cap so the metal doesn't corrode into your infusion. If you're going to use a metal cap cap and lid and ring set to your mason jar, for example, put a little bit of parchment paper or fabric down first, then tighten your lid on so you don't get any kind of corrosion happening to your jar. Put it somewhere dark. Shake it every day like I mentioned earlier to make sure that oil is weighing everything down. Then after a few days you'll notice a natural settling to the bottom. You don't need to shake it as much, though I do recommend shaking it when you think about it, and leave it alone for 4 to 6 weeks at least to infuse all those properties into your olive oil. To be honest, I infuse them until I need it, which is often in the fall. So I'll often infuse for a good 3 months, 4 months, until the season is among us where the kids are possibly getting an ear infection, where we're getting sinus infections, and then we feel it in our ears and that lymph needs to be drained. Then it's been infusing extra long, it has become extra strong, and if stored correctly and in something sterilized, there's no problem doing that. And then I'll strain it after, like I said, at least 4 to 6 weeks, up to months. Strain it and store it into amber colored jars or dropper bottles ideally, and that is it. That is how you make it. 50-50 ratio to your mullein leaves and oil. Put it in a jar. Try to make sure that jar is filled to the top with your ratio of oil. Cap it. Shake it every day, allow it to sit and relax for 4 to 6 weeks. I know some of y'all out there are impatient. You can speed up the process by setting it in the sun for 8 to 10 hours for the day. Or you can put it on a double boiler with water, get it to a boil, add your oil and your flowers to a glass bowl over the water and heat it up for a couple hours and infuse it that way. That added heat will allow it to activate and those medicinal properties in that flower to release into the oil sooner. Personally, I love the old school way of infusing. I like to set it and forget about it, and then I'll just keep making them, and I have a great supply that way, and I don't have to really remember to do anything, and I can put it in, put it on my shelf, forget about it, and go do other things and not stand over the oven, not forget about it outside. Any of those ways are great. I'm just sharing how and why it works for me to do it the way I do it. Now let's fast forward a couple months and oh no, someone has an ear infection. I hope not, but let's pretend someone does. How do you use your earache oil? First of all, that earache oil is really nice when it's warmed up. I mean like body temperature warm. Don't put it on the stove and then try to put it in an ear canal. You don't want to do that. But rolling that amber dropper bottle in between your hands for a while, setting up by your wood burning fireplace just for a little bit, testing it on your wrist before you put it in your ear. Warming it is not necessary, though it is quite lovely to do beforehand. Then all you need to do is place 2 to 4 drops in the infected ear and do it laying down and allow it to sit there for 10 minutes. Then put a cotton ball in it and you can go about your day. You can do it to the other ear as well. How often do you do it? If pain persists, you can do it again, and you can do it for every hour until the pain stops. Now, if that helps right away and you're just looking to do it and then to maintenance it and to make sure that pain doesn't come back, you know, 1 to 3 times a day is ideal and probably all you need. Again, seek out other medical advice from a professional if that earache is not, you know, curing up. And even if it is, again, this doesn't necessarily address the root cause of your ear infection. This isn't a cure-all. It is something to use to possibly try out, to possibly help alleviate and possibly cure an infection in the ear because of the antimicrobial, antiviral, antibacterial properties of the mullein and garlic. Praise God, isn't He wonderful that He gives us these properties and these plants to help assist us. So you sat here and listened to me talk about how to make it. For you visual learners, let's make it together. So here I'll show you a garlic and mullein blossom oil. Is that not so pretty? And see how everything moves so slowly and suspended in the oil? So beautiful. So this is a 50-50 ratio. Now I'll show you some of those blossoms we collected earlier. Look how beautiful they are. All right, let's make a couple bottles. I am working on making every one of our customers their own infused bottle of mullein oil, and instead of taking it out and straining it, I'm going to leave everything in here so they can see how beautiful it is and appreciate the work that goes into an infused oil. They can then either use it when it's not in amber. They have about a year still. It'll be still okay, especially if they keep it somewhere dark. They'll have a year to use it, or they could strain it into amber themselves. That's up to them. But people do love to see the active infusion before it's been strained. So I thought we could make some of these together. I have sterilized these little babies by putting them into boiling water for 10 minutes and then allowing them to air dry overnight. And we're gonna take these little blossoms, so beautiful, and stick them down in here. Now, if you're using a mason jar, you know, a quart jar, something bigger, this won't be as tedious. But again, see, as you can see, you can just drop them in and fill it up with oil. But for me, I'm making these for customers, and I take the time to do a little bit more tedious things because we're talking about intentionality and to show our customers how much we love them and how beautiful God's creation can be. So I don't mind taking the time for them. And you never know where they are living. They may never see mullein blossoms. So I just really want them to have their own mullein blossom experience. So I'm gonna just take this extra time to poke them through this tiny hole here. Again, you do not have to do this. You can infuse a big jar, and then after the 4 to 6 weeks, pour it into smaller jars. So this I'm going to not even sell until 4 to 6 weeks to the customer. So this I'm infusing right now, and they're gonna get it fully infused and ready to go. But like I said, with these plants inside. So beautiful. Now I need to add a little bit of garlic. And you guys, I have a garlic braid from last year left still from our garden that I braided up, and that's the garlic I'm gonna use. We have this year's garlic too, but it's not cured yet, so let's break in this. There's no need to wash garlic. It comes from the ground. If it's grown yourself, you know, pesticide-free and clean land, there's no need to wash it. It comes in its own little packaging even to keep it nice and clean. So I'm just gonna take the little bit of paper off these cloves and throw a couple in here as well. Like so. There's one. There's one. I'm gonna do one more. This is a, I believe this is a 2 ounce, this might be 3. I believe this is a 2 ounce bottle. All right. So we have our garlic and mullein in there, little mullein blossoms, and now we're gonna top it off with some really beautiful olive oil. All right, here we are. Oh yeah, how beautiful is that? Let's add a cap on it. And then I like to shake it up really good. And sometimes that oil level will drop as it absorbs, so just keep an eye on that. See how I did lose a bit? And I'll top them off here. I'll go through and top them all off in a little while to make sure everything is staying submerged under the oil here. Now, how long will these wonder drops last for your ears? If stored properly in an amber jar in the dark, some are fairly cool when you're not using it, you're good for a couple years. However, isn't it wonderful how it works out that we operate in seasons? So I, every year, have everything last for 1 year, because by the time that year is lapsed, where are we again? We're at foraging season again. I want to get out there and get the flowers again and get fresh made again and stock up again. So in my head, everything's a year. I will use it, and I'm always looking to stockpile, make enough to last a year, to last business a year, to make it to the next foraging season. Again, by always being conscious of our land and respectful, and of the wonderful pollinators, that they get the food that these plants provide, that we leave enough for it to come back next year, that everyone has an opportunity for these plants and to benefit from them. Thank you all for joining us on another Monday of Pharmacy with an F class here at the Wild Carrot Farmstead. If you want a kind of fun, more concise, quicker, short on this, check out our Instagram page where we do all kinds of fun tutorials in 1 minute or less. Thank you all. I love you. See you next time.